China de novo emerged on July 4, 2020.
It received global support in efforts to exorcise communism from China. 1.4 billion Chinese people continue to suffer under the atheistic and totalitarian communist regime.
Join the whistleblower movement and save the world from COVID-19 and the evil mastermind behind it.
Peter, hang on a second. But hang on a second. When you guys left, I want to make sure you say it's unclear. It is absolutely clear. The intelligence agencies, the Five Eyes in the State Department came out and said, "Hey, number one, this is part of a PLA program. It run in Wuhan, the P4 lab, under the auspices of the People's Liberation Army. Of that, there's no doubt. And, sir, this came from a gain of function experiment. The only question before us." Did it inadvertently leak out of the lab,
That's right.
or was
That's
it
all I'm saying.
or was it purposely let off? Yeah. So make sure. So here's what I'll give at the Biden administration.
Just everybody understands.
Okay.
We know at this point it's from the lab. We know that Anthony Fauci gave them the money to build that thing. We know that Anthony Fauci allowed this gain of function so they could genetically engineer something more dangerous. The only thing we don't know is whether it was an accidental slip from the lab or whether they actually intended to put that out. And I can make the case, I can make a strong case that this was a bioweapon that was purposely released and hit right at the United States. But that's why I think it's important to have a presidential commission. And we've done this plenty of times before. We did it when Kennedy was shot. Obama did it when there was the BP spill. We did it when Pearl Harbor happened. Look, as a nation, Steve, we need to get to the bottom of what the CCP is doing. Because you know what, Steve? It's not just that they're killing Americans. They're using the fog of war with this pandemic to go out and crush democracy in Hong Kong and to have their way with the rest of this world and to promote this authoritarian model. Hey, yeah, sure, maybe they can control us a little better because they're authoritarians. But you know what? Here's another thing. It's like they had SARS back in China before, so there's thoughts, people like Stephen Hatfield have pointed out, that they have more T-cell immunity to this virus. So they're thinking like Mao Zedong, hey, if we lose people here in China, they'll lose more and we'll gain relatively. So these are the kinds of things that we need to be discussing, not with tinfoil hats on, but with virologists from places like Fort Detrick, with economists, and with geopolitical strategists who are going to look at the chessboard, Steve, and say, you know what? The CCP is exploiting this virus for geopolitical gain, okay? They're doing that. That's their strategy. The only question is whether it's strategy motivated by an accidental release of that virus or whether it was planned all along. But this thing's a bioweapon, whether it's from nature or from CCP. It's a bioweapon the way it's hitting us.
So the NBC, I was watching NBC earlier today, and they actually had a report from finally, the WHO has sent their researchers in. They're actually going into the lab, coming in and out, checking out some of the stuff. And one of the first things, you know what they had to say, and it's amazing because it's like looking through a mirror. We talked about this exact thing a year ago today, to the date, when they said, you know, it looks like they've taken down an internal database here at the Wuhan Institute, NBC News, right? And they said, what was the database? It was the research of Shi Zhengli, the bat lady, the Batwoman, all of her research, the gain of function, the bats from Yan'an Cave, all of the research that we've been talking about from day one. And finally, you know, we've come full circle 365 days later where you can go on NBC and you hear something that you would have heard on War Room a year ago.
Gertz came on this show a year ago. He was on this morning, came on the show a year ago today and talked about the PLA program at the Wuhan lab. In the Washington Post, the next day said, fringe conspiracy theories abound. You're wrong. You're liars. You misled the American people, and this is why people are dead. We have not forced our way into that lab.
太多人都在打电话，关于我们的严博士，关于爆料革命曾经爆出的冠状病毒 CCP 病毒，啊， 全世界都现在都在说这是共产党的生化武器，全世界都在说，所以是不要着急。全世界都说咱在家待着，他都找咱。啊，严博士厉害了，119路德访谈厉害了，科学家们厉害了，这些博士军团厉害了，爆料革命那当然厉害了，是吧？新中国联邦疯了，看到了吗？全世界最牛的科学家、企业家于一身的几个人，我已经头一段都搂住了吧？啊，是在10月初都给我联系，现在都站出来说话了，厉害吧？现在去中国回来的，还有现在了解的，包括美国军情部门，你看比尔·格是了吗？咱们的董事，法治基金董事，直接说啊 ，CIA 美国政府部门认定这就是共产党的生化武器，我们严博士说的叫超限生化武器。啊，欧洲你看着吧，啊，多少王八蛋那些政治得倒霉啊，不要着急。
On Monday, a committee of the German parliament, the Bundestag, heard a petition calling for sanctions against Chinese officials for violating human rights. Glacia Kwong, a digital rights activist from Hong Kong now studying in Berlin, was one of the initiators of the petition that also calls on Germany to sue China in the International Court of Justice for its actions in Hong Kong. DW correspondent Thomas Sparrow was at the Bundestag as Glacia Kwong arrived for the hearing.
Today is a big day for activist Glacia Kwong in Berlin. In a few hours, German MPs will be discussing a petition she started, which has been signed by over 50,000 people. How are you feeling about today, Glacia? Are you nervous?
Yes, I'm very nervous because it will be the first time I'm speaking in front of parliamentarian members and it will be about Hong Kong. That's why I'm very nervous about today.
Kwong wants Germany to do more against human rights violations in Hong Kong. What exactly are you calling for? What are the actions that you're expecting?
We are calling for individual sanctions against human rights violations that happened in Hong Kong and China. We are also asking for a lifeboat scheme for Hong Kongers that are in need. And we are also asking the government to call off the investment deal with China because that would damage Germany's commitment to values. Bye-bye.
Kwong says the German government's reaction has been weak. Berlin has criticized China's policies, but the activist wants more. Inside Parliament, Kwong gives a short speech and discusses the crisis with MPs. The current situation in Hong Kong is dramatic and it's getting worse day by day. Basic freedoms, rule of law, human rights are being deliberately and systematically destroyed by Beijing. The passing of the national security law has unfortunately confirmed all the fears that existed. Even the so-called loyal opposition is now under attack. One cannot help feeling that Beijing does not want any opposition in Hong Kong.
House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy headed down to Palm Beach today for a meeting with President Trump at Mar-a-Lago. Reports continue to surface about this. McCarthy apparently initiated this meeting. Is McCarthy trying to get back on President Trump's good side? And what message is this sending to the House Republican establishment? Let's find out more about this trip down to Florida and welcome in Newsmax White House correspondent Emerald Robinson, who has the latest. Good afternoon, Emerald.
Hi, John. Good to see you. Well, for all intents and purposes, this looks like a kiss the ring meeting. The president, former President Trump, has emerged as the de facto head of the party. That is not being in question now, considering what happened in the Senate this week with the vote to dismiss impeachment. Although it didn't pass, it showed overwhelming support from Republicans against this impeachment effort against the former president. Now let's talk about why McCarthy needs to go. Now he's the master fundraiser, right, in the Republican Party. And as they look at 2022, he faces a conundrum. There's the donor base that he is somewhat beholden to that is not necessarily pro-Trump. And then there's the GOP voting base who is extremely pro-Trump. But as the fundraiser, he's going to have to maintain a balance somehow between the two. Also, the president has his own efforts planned for 2022. He's setting up an office down there in Florida. There's been a handful of staff that's already been placed there, and we're actually told that there could be more announcements regarding staffing early next week. So McCarthy knows, he's very politically savvy. He knows he's got to make peace. There was a rift between the two somewhat over impeachment when McCarthy said that the former president held some responsibility for January 6th. Although he didn't support impeachment, he did float the idea of a censure.
You know, they have a saying, Emerald, in Washington, there's no permanent friendships, no permanent enemies, just permanent ambition.
Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby, in a briefing on Thursday, said U.S. Defense Minister Lloyd Austin remains committed to maintaining the readiness of American troops in South Korea through military exercises. Kirby highlighted the importance of troop readiness amid North Korea's continued pursuit of new advanced weapons. He said there is no place that is more important than on the Korean Peninsula in the value of training and exercises to keep forces ready. His statement comes after questions have been raised on whether the South Korea-U.S. joint military exercises could be carried out this year. The exercise planned for last March was postponed, while the one carried out last August was shortened due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and it was conducted using computer simulation exercises that didn't mobilize troops and weaponry. Also recently, Seoul has said the two Koreas can discuss whether to postpone or cancel the joint exercises via an inter-Korean joint committee, first mentioned by President Moon Jae-in earlier this month in response to North Korea's continued opposition to holding the drills. Defense Minister Seok said earlier this week that the military is preparing for the exercises as planned in case there's no progress in inducing a response from North Korea to discuss the matter.
The combined exercise in the first half of this year is a computer-simulated command post exercise without outdoor drills. It is a regular program and for defense purposes. We are closely discussing how to conduct it in detail with the U.S.
The minister had also vowed to make significant progress in the envisioned transfer of operational control from Washington to Seoul during his term, which requires going through the joint exercises in their entirety. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Breaking news, President Biden's choice to be Commerce Secretary, Gina Raimondo, claims to be tough on China, but refuses to commit to keeping Chinese companies such as Huawei on the government entities list. Senator Ted Cruz criticizing her refusal, saying, quote, "It already looks like Team Biden is rushing to embrace the worst elements of the Chinese Communist Party. Huawei is a global espionage operation masquerading as a technology company, and the Senate should use every tool at our disposal to keep Huawei on the entities list." Well, joining us now is Gordon Chang, columnist, author, senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute, great American. Gordon, let's start with, first of all, aren't you proud of Senator Cruz? He is really stepping to the front of the spear in this effort to defend the United States from the Chinese communists. Your thoughts?
Absolutely proud of Senator Cruz, and he was absolutely right. You know, nobody should serve as Commerce Secretary unless they're willing to commit to the Senate and to the American people that they'll keep Huawei and other Chinese companies on the entity list. Huawei is a danger to the United States. It's a danger to our allies and friends and partners. It's going to steal the world's data, as it's been trying to do. It's going to try to manipulate devices on the fifth generation wireless communication networks. Senator Cruz is absolutely right.
You know, I'm struck also by President Xi Jinping's warning to President Biden to not be confrontational, to not confront the Chinese, whether referring to the South China Sea, whether it is on the failure of Chinese container ships to pick up U.S. agricultural products to ship to China. It looks to me like the confrontation is originating again with the Chinese, and the good president of Communist China is, well, playing a PR game.
And people in the region in Asia know that Xi Jinping is testing Biden. The Chinese don't respect him. They think they can push him around. And as we saw from the Commerce Secretary nominee, I think Beijing believes they don't even have to lift a finger these days. So this is one of those dangerous moments, Lou, where China is really arrogant.
And China telling Taiwan that independence would mean war. This, along with the overflights and all of the naval activities in the South China Sea, China is really pressing, as you say, testing President Biden, but also pressing U.S. interests in a way that is a new level for even their expansionary foreign policy.
Yes, you're absolutely right about that. What we have seen, of course, those two very belligerent air provocations on Saturday and Sunday against Taiwan. Now with Xi Jinping's warning to Taiwan, which really is a warning to President Biden. So right now, the Chinese think that they can do what they want. And that makes this one of those times where things can go really wrong. Because when dictators don't respect leaders of democracies, that's when we have these really big wars in history. And so Biden right now is under the spotlight because the Chinese just think that they can kick him.
And right now, the Chinese that own a majority of the freighters, the container ships that traverse the global routes to every continent, is refusing to pick up U.S. At primarily the western ports, the western U.S. ports, to pick up agricultural products that have been bought, that are part of the Phase 1 trade agreement. And they are turning back some $1 billion in agricultural products because they want to hurry home, they say, to pick up more goods to export to the United States. It's remarkable what we're witnessing here, the gall, if you will, of the communist Chinese.
And this also shows the folly of those people who believed in globalization, that the United States didn't need to own chips, that the United States could depend on China for pharmaceutical products. This list just goes on, Lou, of how people thought that we could just live in a world with peace with the communist regime, and it's proven not to be the case. And that's why this point is one where the United States is in jeopardy. We cannot assume that we're going to get through this.
Now, President Trump led this country to energy independence and was on his way to creating balanced trade around the world, not just with China. But we are now watching, for example, without even hesitation, 48 lobbyists, K Street lobbyists, banding together to support Congresswoman Liz Cheney. There is just no shame on the part of the donor class, the corporate America, the U.S. multinationals, Wall Street, and of course big tech, they mean to have their will work. And they're more aligned, frankly, the radical left and particularly big tech, Wall Street, with the Chinese policies, economic policies, than they are with the previous administration's economic policies, which drove this country to a level of prosperity we hadn't, that was unprecedented, really. Your thoughts?
And you've been talking for years, Lou, about how corporate America, the chambers of commerce and Wall Street really saw that their interests were aligned with communist China and with others that meant the United States harm. And they felt they had more interest with elites in those regimes than they did with American workers. So we had a lot of administrations prior to Trump that really put the American worker last. And you know, right now we're seeing the emergence of these forces again. And this is dangerous for our democracy.
Gordon Chang, always great to have you with us. Thanks for being with us, Gordon. Good to see you. See you again soon.
The department sees no reason why tensions over Taiwan need to lead to anything like confrontation. And so we find that comment unfortunate and certainly not commensurate with our intentions to meet our obligations under the Taiwan Relations Act and to continue to, as Secretary Blinken at the State Department said yesterday, look for ways where we can cooperate with China.
I am Dr. Stephen Quay, and this is an introduction to my paper. A Bayesian analysis concludes beyond a reasonable doubt that SARS-CoV-2 is not a natural zoonosis, but instead is laboratory derived. But where do we stand at this point in time? As a reminder, with SARS 2003, it took 4 months to understand that the intermediate host was a civet cat. With respect to MERS, 2015, it was 9 months before we knew that the camel was responsible. With SARS-CoV-2, after 13 months, we still don't have a candidate for the intermediate host. So in this Bayesian analysis paper that I've written, I started with probabilities that were based in part on work done by the WHO investigator, Dr. Peter Daszak and others. For this starting probability, I set the likelihood of a zoonotic origin at 98.8%, a laboratory origin at 1.2%. I then presented 26 different evidence sets that were considered individually and impacted the overall probability. It's contained in the paper, along with the other 190 pages that go into great detail on this evidence analysis. At the end of the process, when 26 different evidence sets had been evaluated, the concluding probability was that a zoonotic origin was 0.2%, a laboratory origin 99.8%. This is greater than the typical 95 to 98% expected for beyond a reasonable doubt in the legal standard. In addition, the paper contains an analysis of adenovirus vaccine sequences that were found in lavage specimens from 5 patients with COVID in December 2019, analyzed by the Wuhan Institute of Virology. This slide shows the typical adenovirus vaccine in a drawing here with 1 through 990 being the adenovirus portion. The spike protein immunogen is in the middle in red, and the tail of the 3' adenovirus vaccine is shown on the right. And as you can see in the bars here, the sequence reads, the contiguous sequence reads run from the adenovirus section through and into the immunogen and then into the 3' end of the adenovirus. So this is very strong evidence that an adenovirus was present in these early patients. This concludes beyond a reasonable doubt that SARS-CoV-2 was not natural, but instead is laboratory derived.
香港自由新闻网刊文，在美国要求大力彻查的背景下，世卫组织代表团在武汉结束隔离，将开始新冠病毒溯源调查。中共应该已经安排妥当，就等世卫组织公布中共写好的调查报告。BBC 称，德国将阿斯利康疫苗接种人权限制在65岁以下。美国郑重宣布将保卫菲律宾，包括南中国海主权。美国开始用实际行动节制中共在南海的囊子野心。国家脉动刊文，拜登国务院正在审查川普任期宣布的新疆种族灭绝声明，拜登政府意欲何为，拭目以待。严立梦博士发推称，对更具传染性的 COVID-19 南非变异毒株 Novavax 疫苗只有 49.4% 的有效性，表明过半受试者接种后仍会被感染。肯定的啦，疫苗本来就不是解决新冠大流行的有效手段。最新证据表明 ，Dr. Fauci 通过秘密转播的方式继续增强功能冠状病毒的研究。美国大量散户同一时间大举买入即将退市的游戏驿站期权和股票，让华尔街多家机构损失惨重。柏林将军弟弟被任命领导美国太平洋军，他曾短暂担任过国家安全顾问，川普总统于去年11月将他赦免。严立梦博士发推表示，最新的对羟氯喹治疗 COVID-19 的国际测评表明，患者早期使用 HCQ 治疗的国家，比禁用这种安全的抗疟疾药物的国家死亡率低 79%。羟氯喹抗新冠方案目前仍然有效，医生们需要知道怎么使用 HCQ。2021年1月26日晚，上海市济南路因疫情突然被封闭，而不夜城新天地也变成空城，几乎见不到什么人。知情网友披露，济南路边上的原城里小区发现疑似病例，小区及周边的商户被封，连夜搭建帐篷，开始核酸检测。
小 情报或者小点不保证后果是何？谢谢配合。
说他出主意了啊，还得出来对待，我叫人占选，整个大门给人喊出去，还的也不行。查体志愿者注意。全体志愿者注意，全体志愿者注意，不管黑的，任何人的都不行，俺亲爹的都不行，全部封死，黑照上给他喊出去，黑狂啊，跟我说我给他喊出去，任何人的都不行，一律封乡门，大门乡门都封了，大门乡门都封了。谁也不能出来，出来就能狗腿小事。
稳定，没有一家争的，没有一家吵的，没有一家闹的，说这个是非常好。啊，那你也得送，那没办法，来的就这么来就这么多。
怎么回事啊？门口怎么关着了？啊？哎，那个，他凭什么关呀？不让出门？现在还控制什么了？不是什么都做完了吗？怎么还不让出门呢？这什么意思啊？没有人反抗。他是就不让我出去，这过了好好的日子，说他妈关上就关上，说限行就限行，凭什么呀？你拿出什么证据来呀？政府关着的，他拿出电话来了，还是拿出了那个政府证来了？啊，在这闲扯淡，走他！办正事没人管，闲扯淡你出来了啊？你出来干嘛？找死哦！还当着不让出去了，限制人身自由，光限行的时候。下个通知，什么时候通行啊？什么时候解散呀？什么时候让人好好的生活呀？什么时候疫情过去啊？这就没人管了。
亲人们、朋友们，疫情期间真的哪里都不要去。今天我们是10点半到达海南，那个应该登陆。船已经靠到这个海南了，可是8点钟的时候，有一条船上有一个人发烧。你看吧，我们是这条船上的人有一个人发烧，他们8点钟就到了，现在已经是12点40分了，他们都还没有下到船。我们是10点半到的，全部都不能下船，要等待那个发烧的人。检测那个核酸，如果他是阳性的话，可能我们全部都下不了船。
现在我们是在第3移民院周围隔离，看一下我们现在这个房间的居住。我们想上卫生间根本就没有，所以给我们上卫生间所用的东西就是这种坐便器。
中共邪恶政府最近大力推广通过做肛拭子来检测中共病毒，中共愚民武术辱民的又一体现。
然后那个不甘心想吐，浑身乏力，然后昨天晚上开始发烧。2个飞蛾拉肚子上吐下泻，小病住院，大的打了吊针，打了不停。
凉了，全都凉了。你
你知道吗？在怀化曾经最繁华的地方，竟然有这样一个商业综合体，而它却成了现在这样，唯独一些民间门面在经营。然而，风行长廊的内圈以及这个地下商场全部都已 over。而曾经轰动全城的沃尔玛已成为永久的期待。走进商场，空荡荡的感觉扑面而来，太黑了，太吓人了，走吧走吧。商场门口的甜酒汤圆也显得叫唤得如此的苍白无力。
甜酒汤圆，
它现在有多荒凉，当初开盘就有多火爆。地用反租价格标志2到4万一平，现在门面租也租不出去，甚至有人用来养鸡。
这就是上海长隆客运总站，春运第一天啊，一个人都没有啊，售票那天一个人都没有。
中美两国关系出现严重困难，两军关系也面临很多风险与挑战。事实证明，遏制中国是不可能完成的任务，最终只会搬起石头砸了自己的脚。To contain China, mission impossible。当前，中美两国两军关系站在新的历史起点上，我们希望美新政府同中方共同努力，秉持不冲突、不对抗、相互尊重、合作共赢的精神，加强对话，聚焦合作，管控分歧，推动中美关系健康稳定
重要的事
向前
情
发展。
说3遍：中国没有种族灭绝，中国没有种族灭绝，中国没有种族灭绝。句号。
中共喉舌环球网报道，英政府将于1月31日起实施 BNO 签证政策，中共恐吓称将作出有力回应。由中共盗国贼控制的中国电信、中国移动发布公告，美国财政部的制裁命令将于2021年3月9日生效。中共喉舌《环球时报》发文恐吓称，台独就意味着战争，大陆军机兵分3路绕台。2021年1月28日，4架 PLA 军机再次闯入台湾西南的防空识别区。港媒28日报道，中共驻香港联络办公室正进行大换班，约480个待编制人员要有一半被换掉，其规模历来罕见。香港学者对此分析称，北京一系列动作应该与中共所谓100周年建党以及明年中共20大有关，香港已彻底沦陷。中共喉舌环球网称，崔天凯敦促美国不要将中国当作假想敌，中共的生化武器已经让世界上亿人感染，更应该把中共列为人类的敌人。通化贴吧消息，通化有建方舱医院，招大工800元每天，小工500元每天。清醒的网友回复：方舱是真的，但不代表是医院，隔离房也是方舱。吉林通化一男子将自己的生活处境通过今日头条发出，但中共匪警却以发布不实言论为由将其刑拘10日。中共政府永远不给老百姓解决问题，而是想尽办法解决提出问题的人。中共央行从1月25日到1月28日连续4天回笼资金，投资者担心中共货币政策可能开始收紧，股市将会承压。周四，中国股市3大股指全线大跌，当日市值蒸发1.9万亿。网易新闻网消息，消失的外汇，大数据权威，中国4000亿美元外汇去向不明，只有中共盗国贼才知道这些钱去向哪里。2021年1月29日，华融资产管理股份有限公司原董事长赖小民被执行死刑，为中共盗国贼卖命的最终下场就是如此。核心资产被掏空的海航集团发布声明，债权人申请法院对我集团破产重组，1000亿负债最终又是由老百姓买单。
亲爱的战友们啊，
这是一场人类上前所未有的话语权、信仰和宗教、经济和政治、人性和道德一场彻底的大转变，无人可以挡，只是谁来改变。你扮演了什么角色，谁都挡不了，这就是时代。
我们真正是感受到了爆料革命这些东西深入咱们战友每个家庭。
每个生命的每个部分，都是一家一家的支持爆料革命。爆料革命成了很多战友生命中不可缺少的，而且是五湖四海。而且我真也没想到，世界上原来这么多战友支持我，无处不在，没有任何国家，没有任何地方，非洲的、南美洲的、亚洲的、东欧的、北欧的、西欧的，那北美洲就不用说了。
全人类真正的开始了一个从来想都不敢想，就是要消灭共产党，因为他杀了全世界人，这个仇多大？谁想送回去？永远不可能，没有一个人敢谈。
我发现咱中国人真是憋的时间太长了，这个力量太大了。集结真正的力量，准备着没有共产党的新中国，我们每个人要扮演的角色，灭共没你不行。